Are you ready to hear some of the best reading strategies you may ever be privileged to hear on a podcast, or anywhere else for that matter? Jennifer Serravallo has swept in to leave a trail of golden breadcrumbs so that your students know the way from one cover to another of any book you may challenge them with. So much fun and effective reading strategies you are not going to find anywhere else. Jennifer insists on the importance of strategies as a way of scaffolding reading. And yes, she not only knows, but revels in the concept of scaffolding, my new best friend. She was going to talk about inferencing, summarising, using the title to remember key points of a story, the first and last lines, what the main character wants to achieve and what happens to stop them from reaching that goal, and oh my goodness, so much more. Jennifer is going to lead us on a whirlwind ride down the road to decoding the written text painlessly, and how we can engage our students by finding culturally and socially relevant stories so that they see themselves in their reading. You're also going to hear that she challenges me on some hardcore beliefs I've always held about learning, and it took me quite by surprise. Join us now for an adventure in reading strategies, and if you never thought it could be an adventure, just wait. And don't miss the end when Jennifer passionately shares the nightmare she now sees as happening in the teaching community. See if you can guess which country she would most like other countries to model, and it's not Finland, and the fight she believes we all must participate in if we want to save the next generation of learners. Ready? So Jennifer, thank you so much for being here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I read so much about your work and I have questions for you.
All right. Well, that sounds good, Donna. Thank you for having me.
No, it's a pleasure. All right. Well, I was a teacher in New Mexico before I came to Spain and became a high school teacher. I was, my favorite was sixth grade. So I'm just going to give you a scenario of sixth graders. And this is actually the reality of what I was going through. Half of my class they really don't like to read. They're not good readers. Their parents aren't models for reading. They look at screens a lot. They do everything but read. But they're vocational. Even vocational choices are going to be limited if they don't have a stronger foundation. So what is something you could do for my sixth graders?
That's a really great question. And I'm glad that you talk about in that question, the importance of supporting kids' motivation, engagement, affect, what they believe about reading. Because there's a lot of attention, at least in the US, I don't know if this is true in Spain, but there's a lot of tension on decoding skills or building background knowledge, which are, of course, essential to developing readers. But I don't think we talk enough about, do kids even want to read? Because if they're not actually spending time reading, all the strategies in the world are not going to help them to become better readers. They've got to practice. They've got to read. So why aren't they reading? Well, first I'd ask them, what is it about books that is not appealing? I think sometimes what's going on is that kids are not given enough choice, or that they have a difficult time selecting books that are going to be appealing to them. That could be what's going on. You mentioned the attention on screens. And there's a really real problem. I have a rising ninth grader daughter, and man, what's on that screen? There's nothing that can compete, right? It's all her friends are there, all the latest trends, really engaging videos. It's a different quality of attention that's required for fiddling around on your screen versus a sustained reading in a novel. I actually have a podcast and I interview researchers. And one of my recent guests is a scientist named Dr. Marianne Wolf. And you might be familiar with her work. She writes a lot about dyslexia and supporting beginning reading. And her latest book is called Reader Come Home. And it's all about this idea of how we as adults who had this reading home, right, this experience of sustained focused reading, have even ourselves, she admits to it, I admit to it, you might even admit to it, become more distracted in this digital world, our attention has been more scattered, right? And we have to work to come home to that attentive place. Then we think about kids who maybe never had that home. They don't know what home base feels like. They don't know what that sustained attention feels like. And the hopefulness in her message is that you can teach it and you can practice it, but you need to tap into the brain's neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to change, right? So from having these constant, what she calls dopamine lollipops, right? What's on the screen, you're getting this constant feed of dopamine, like, new information, new information, new information. And it changes your brain to crave that and to expect that as what you need to hold attention. But what you need to hold attention in a book is just a very different kind of attention. So you asked me, what do I do? Right? So what do we do about all this? So this is all background. What I do is I make sure, to set up time in my classroom every day for sustained reading. Kids have to practice it. And we can't assume that they're going to have time outside of the school day to practice it. What we hope is if we give time during the school day to practice it, then they will continue that habit outside of the classroom. Not always the case, but we definitely need to make time for it. Second, I think that there's strategies we can offer kids around book choice, like how to select books, how to find books. In my book, The Reading Strategies Book 2.0, I have a whole section on different ways to find books that are going to appeal to you based on your interest, based on past reading. There's great online tools now, for example, that can help us to do this. I have a whole chunk of strategies in my chapter on engagement motivation around attention and teaching kids about this idea that your attention is going to crave something else, something more exciting, a constant change. But how do we get into that reading zone, that attentive state required by visualizing, by noticing if our mind is wandering and backing up and rereading, right? So I think we need to teach kids that this is normal and natural for all people, even adults, but that we have to train our brain, and we can, because brains are plastic, right? They're changeable. So yeah, those are three things. Make the time, help them select books, and teach them about their attention and give them strategies for how to manage their attention and get into that reading zone by visualizing and rereading and those kinds of things.
All right. So those are three really important concrete steps. You're saying we need to give them motivation. I mean, I love reading. So I was the worst person in the world to try to explain to someone why reading is wonderful, because I just do it so intuitively. I mean, this goes to reading strategies about rereading and sort of just living in the books. What I did, it was more intuitive. And I realized that intuitive doesn't mean really effective. When I was teaching sixth grade in New Mexico, I was desperate for them to love reading as much as I did. And so I actually taped all of the books in my library, which is insane. But at that time, it was before CDs, before we could download audiobooks on the computer. And I had them sit a half an hour every morning with a book in front of them and listening to it. And I have to believe that it added vocabulary to them, and they had a certain comfort. They learned a comfort level of reading. I don't know how long-term it is. So then we get into strategies. Why aren't reading strategies why aren't they intuitive? Why do we need to learn reading strategies?
Before I answer that question, I'd love to back up and just point out something that you did in your classroom, which was to give kids access to texts in ways that maybe aren't true in every classroom, right? If we give kids opportunities to say, you could read by yourself, you could read and listen to me read it to you, you could just listen, like opening up those possibilities for kids and counting all of that as reading, it's just really important. So I just wanted to give a shout out for that practice. I think that was really great.
Yeah. And also, Jennifer, one other thing I did, I think is also very important, is I let them lie down wherever they wanted. They could sit at their desk, they could lie on the floor, they could do whatever they wanted, because reading needs to be enjoyable. And that's one thing that's important. Okay.
Absolutely.
Just wanted to point that out.
That's one of the things, and I have that in my book too, the importance of flexible seating and making sure that kids are comfortable. And, I don't choose to read in a hard backed chair sitting up. That's not what my first choice would be. So yeah, absolutely. So your question was, why aren't strategies intuitive? So I want to start off by just saying what I call a strategy, because the word strategy gets used in a lot of different ways in the research literature, in practitioner-facing books. So when I talk about a strategy, I talk about a how-to. So if we think about a skill, something we want kids to be able to do, like focus their attention, or a skill like infer what's going on between the lines that the author's not explicitly telling us, or a skill like summarising. The strategy is a how-to be able to get us there. So I break down strategies into really a couple of sentences. So for example, if I want kids to be we'll take inferring. If I want them to be able to think about this character in their story and describe who this character is or have a theory about who this character is, where the author didn't come right out and tell me, I might tell the students, one thing you can do is you can track the way that the character acts in different scenes with different characters. And you could notice how they act in each of those different moments in the story, then put those noticings together to develop a theory about who they really are as a person. Right. So that's like an example of what I call a strategy, a step-by-step how-to. Sometimes in the research literature, you see things like, some people call inferring a strategy. In my terminology, I'd call that a skill.
Unless we point it out, students are not going to do it.
Exactly. So, but my point is I want to take it one step further and articulate for them, how do I infer? How do I make an inference? So I want to say for them, or if I want them to summarize, summarising has been shown in the research literature to support comprehension. If we pause after reading and summarize what we've read, it can help us to be, I think it's partly because we catch like, oh, I can't summarize, let me go back and reread, or the act of synthesizing and putting information together in order to summarize sort of cements it in our minds and helps us remember it, right? So summarizing is linked empirically to comprehension. But what my point is I want to teach kids how to summarize. I'm going to give them a step-by-step procedure that they can follow. So I might say, you can think about, this is a really common one you might know, you could think about a story as having a typical structure of somebody, a main character, who wants something. They're in pursuit of some need or desire, right? But something gets in their way. There's an obstacle. And then how does this whole story end up? So you can use the frame, somebody wanted, so, everybody wanted, but so then, to help you to summarize the key information from the story. So that's an example in my terminology of a strategy, of a step-by-step how-to.
Okay, so it's a definitive structure that they can follow and extract the words and the plot information that they need.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Okay.
You can think of it like a little recipe, like a little reading recipe, right? Here's exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to follow these steps. And eventually we want that cognitive, that awareness, that attention to the strategy to go underground and fade away, because what matters is that they can summarize. What matters at the end of the day is that they're inferring. What matters at the end of the day is what I would call the skill. So when I work with teachers to try to get them to be really explicit and break things down into steps in this way, what I often do is ask teachers to spy on themselves as a reader. I give them a text and I ask them to tell me the theme of the story. And then they'll say, oh, this story is really about how even though people are different, they can still be friends. And then I say, how did you get that? How did you figure out a theme? And then they'll say, oh, well, I looked for the moment of change in the story. And I thought about, in that moment of change, what did the character realize? And therefore, what should I realize? Or they might say, well, I looked at the title of the story, and I thought the title had to have some significance to the larger meaning. So I went back and I thought about, how does a story relate to the title? Or they might say, I looked at the last lines of the story at the very end, where the narrator sort of sums the whole story up. And I realized in those last lines that there's some larger, bigger takeaway. All of those are strategies. All those are how-tos. But because we as proficient adult readers are so automatic, because we're so proficient, it's not always front of mind. How did we do that? So I think in order to be explicit, to be clear for kids, and to get kids to do new work that they're not yet doing, we have to break things down into a step-by-step how-to.
All right, so I'm going to ask you some more specifics about the strategy. You're saying that it's important to be reflective, it's important to be more intentional, and to really observe exactly what you say, observe how you're doing it. But what I'm wondering is, it doesn't really help with the enjoyment or the motivation. Does it help students become more motivated to read?
Well, one argument you could make is that it's not very enjoyable to read superficially. If I'm reading and I'm just getting the gist of a text, my heart's not in it. You know what I mean? Like I'm not engaged in it like in a hearts and minds kind of way. So some of those examples I just gave of like looking for a theme or thinking about inferring, understanding the characters as real people, summarizing to make sure I understand what happened in the story. You could argue that some of those comprehension focused strategies will aid in enjoyment. But there's also examples of ways that I could give kids a how-to to focus on the goal of engagement and motivation. So I actually have my book here. I'll just choose one for you. Let's see. Okay. So here's one. This is the first strategy in my chapter on engagement motivation. It goes like this. This is a how-to, right? First, name a book you remember loving. Type its title into a website such as topsta.com. Do you know this website?
I don't.
Okay.
No, but I'm going to look it up later.
So basically, it's an algorithm. It takes the title and it gives you suggestions. So like if you liked this book, you're likely to like these books.
That's amazing.
Right? Okay. So topsta.com. That's the first step. You think of the title. I loved, the Hunger Games. Let me type the Hunger Games. And then it'll give you a bunch of ideas of other books that are similar in some way to the Hunger Games. Okay. Step 2, read the reviews and summaries of the recommended books and think about what it is that you loved about the original book and let that help you select your next great read.
All right. That I really like. Question though, and I don't mean to suppress the enthusiasm I even feel about this, because you mentioned Hunger Games and I'm thinking, oh my God, scary dystopian world. But what if there's no book that you can type in? Do we need to ask the students to just make one up?
Oh, well, in that case, I wouldn't use the strategy.
Okay.
In that case, I'd use this strategy.
Oh my goodness, are you ready? You are prepared. Because I had those students. I'm sure you have also.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I think we have to talk to kids, just this is a sidebar, but to say to them, books can be entertainment, right? So think about the entertainment you consume: video games, television shows, movies, right? Have you ever met a kid who doesn't like any of those things?
No, of course they love those things because someone is doing all the work for them.
Well, yes, there's definitely a support for visualizing because you've got this, interpretation on the screen. So I would say, what is it about Liv and Maddie that you love, this Disney show, right? What is it? Then they'll probably be like, I don't know. Like, let's talk about it. Do you love the character? Something about the characters? Do you find it funny? Like, I try to get at what are the elements of that show that they connect to, and then use that to help them choose the book. Okay,
that is very doable. I love that. Okay.
All right, here's another one. This is the second strategy.
Okay.
It's called consider aspects of your identity to help you choose. So this has nothing to do with a previous read, right? Step 1, reflect on your identity. How would you describe yourself? What groups do you belong to? What places matter to you? What do you most enjoy? Then decide, do you want to choose a book to see yourself, or do you want to read to discover something new? Could you imagine that working? So you think I'm a girl with a mom and a dad. I live in a suburban New Jersey. I like soccer. All right. So do you want to see that same kind of life reflected in the book that you read? You want to read about a city kid who's an artist, or you want to read about an adventure, or look into a completely different window. Right? There's another example. These are all in the suite of strategies that have to do with choosing books.
In one part of your webpage, which I love because it's so easy to explore, you say that it's very important to include culture in the reading strategies. Can you talk a little bit about that and explain how we do that?
Well, I think that, the example I just gave of leading with identity to help you think about what interests you could be one example of that. Like, you could think about what kind of representation do you have in the books. I think in a lot of classrooms, I don't just think, I've done library audits in a lot of different schools around the country. There tends to be a very white, older, white main characters, male authors, heteronormative. There's just that's what's mostly in classroom libraries. If you listen to scholars like Carla España, Luz Herrera, Laura Sensei Moreno, and they talk about the importance of not just language, giving them opportunities to have representations of translanguaging in the books that they're reading, right? Where there's a flowing back and forth between Spanish and English, for example. And also culture. Look at scholars like H. Richard Milner or Dr. Goldie Muhammad, and how critical having that experience of cultural relevance is in the text that kids are offered. And so we might assume, oh, kids don't like reading, but maybe the books that they have available to them are not really holding their attention. They're not really representative of what they want to read in a lot of different ways. And culture, language is one way to look at that.
So let me ask you a question, because I do scaffolds. I'm not sure if you know the term scaffolding. They're activities that you use to introduce new material. It could be the academic language, it can be the context, it can be a concept of a book. And because my students were so reluctant to learn to read, I came up with hundreds of activities for them. And that's what I do in Spain and all over Europe. I share these scaffolding activities. So what I'm wondering is what you think of this. Your strategies seem to be, and correct me if I'm wrong,
they're scaffolds. Well, I think that strategies, as I'm describing a strategy, these steps could be before, they could be during, they could be after reading. I think that when they happen depends upon the particular strategy. But I absolutely think they're scaffolds. I was laughing a little bit inside what you said. I'm not sure if you know the word scaffolding, because my partner teases me by throwing in the word scaffolding because she thinks I use that word so often. She just teases me about it. Yeah. So no, I'm definitely familiar with the concept of scaffolding.
Okay, you didn't laugh out loud, so I wasn't sure you knew what it was.
The idea of a strategy, right, is it's a step-by-step how-to support a reader with something they're not yet doing. It's a scaffold to get to a skill. And just like any scaffold, right, we want to remove that once they become skilled. So once they're able to infer, once they're thinking about the character, once they're thinking of a theme, we're not asking them to walk through these steps or ask yourself this set of questions as you work, right? They're just able to do it automatically. So,
okay. But I think that a little bit of what my practice is lacking are the exercises while they're reading, because I always feel, again, it's because I love reading and I have no problem getting into a book and then losing myself because it's a safe place to be. The world of a book is safe. But once I give my students the scaffolds and they interact with it, then I figure they can go read and enjoy the book and I've done my work. But actually, that's not true. And that's exactly what you're saying, that we need to help them along more intentionally. Is that right?
Yes, you have that lost in a book, can't stop kind of feeling because you are a proficient reader who has become skilled and you don't need the scaffolds anymore. But for a developing reader, and I think sixth graders are still learning to read. I learned to read in college. Right? I learned to read in a different way in college, all the way through. You're constantly learning to read. You're learning new ways to think about text, new ways to synthesize text, new ways to keep your attention in a text that you didn't choose, right? Those are all learning lessons, reading lessons. But yes, I do think that part of approaching a text with a strategy is a deliberateness, a slowing down, and a practicing of something, right? Whether that's asking yourself questions or trying something or being metacognitive, being aware of your own thinking and noticing when you're not, when your attention has shifted or when you're not getting it anymore and you need to go back and do something, actively fix something up. There's a new reader model called the active view of reading. Have you heard of this? So Nell Duke and Kelly Cartwright are the researchers. 2021 was the first paper called The Science of Reading Progresses, and they proposed this new model of reading called the active view of reading. And the model looks at, if you can imagine a small circle, and in that small circle, it says active self-regulation, strategy use, executive functioning. And then there's arrows going into like a Venn diagram, two circles that overlap with word reading, language comprehension, and what they call bridging processes in the middle, things like fluency or being flexible with your word attack and things like that. So this whole model is based on the idea that proficient readers are active. Right? Proficient readers are doing things while they read. They're thinking about their thinking. When they find themselves in a point of difficulty, they do something about it, right? So there's this kind of engaged, hands-on, minds-on, heart-on kind of way of thinking about reading. And I don't know, I wonder if we talk to our kids enough about that it's not a passive in maybe the same way some might watch a movie. I don't know. I'm like a nerd. I watch movies and I analyze the characters and think about theme. I do a lot of the same kind of thinking in movies that I do in a book, but it's not a passive experience. It's a very active experience. And that's part and parcel to what strategies are.
Well, as you're speaking, I realize that giving them these strategies in the classroom is probably really essential, because if their parents, just theoretically, if their parents are not readers and they don't have discussions about books at home or analytic conversations of any means at home, then they're not learning the vocabulary and they're not learning those bridges on how to make connections between an action and the background of one of the characters, for instance. So what you're doing with your strategies is helping them think more three-dimensionally. The other thing I'm wondering about your strategies is that since I'm a reader and I love reading, I have no problems with a linguistic focus. However, most of our students, or let's say 3/4 of our students, really need different learning styles, including art, including color, including speech, including music, for instance. Are any of your strategies focused on different types of learning styles?
The learning styles research, I think, has been a little debunked, actually. But I think that offering kids options is always a good idea. So offering kids options in terms of how they express their learning, giving them opportunities to converse. There's a great deal of research about the importance of conversation and how it aids comprehension. So I'd absolutely make sure to have some time in the classroom for kids to discuss as a whole class or partnerships or small groups. That can be very helpful. There's research around the importance of giving kids opportunities to write about their reading. So giving them, whether it's summarizing or jotting notes or annotating in the text, right? So those are definitely support. So I think it's just a good idea to introduce those different options to complement the strategy. Like, I don't think note-taking is a strategy by itself, but if we teach kids how to take notes, for example, like if I'm reading an informational text, I would tell kids, pause after a chunk, like a paragraph or a page or whatever, like visually, whatever your chunk is on your page, and either jot a keyword or draw a quick sketch to capture the main information that you learned from that section. Continue on throughout the rest of the chapter, then go back and look at all your sketches or keywords to try to put them together and think, what's this mostly about? Right? So there's an example of a strategy for writing about reading or for note-taking that then they would do something while they're reading actively. They'd have to pause, think, represent the main idea or the main topic or whatever from that section in a word or a sketch, and then go back and synthesize or put information together to develop a main idea. So that's a during reading and after reading strategy.
Yeah, I love that. It really does honor the artistic side of us. And I'm no artist, but it might help me just sort of visualize it a different way.
Sure, yeah.
I would like to clarify something, though, because maybe I'm behind in research. I mean, the theory of multiple intelligences, poor Howard Gardner, has been in some respect debunked, but I didn't think that using the term learning style was also a little bit taboo now. Is that what the experts are saying? And I don't agree, by the way, but go ahead.
It is. After our interview, I'll see if I can find a paper for you.
Okay. Yeah. I would like to see that because for instance, when I first came to Spain and I was teaching in the high school, most of the students were going on to be, it was the population was the upper class. And so these students needed more linguistic, logical focus. And then there was one girl who was just an artist. She had the heart and soul of an artist. And maybe it was psychological, but she could not engage in the work. And her learning style was through art. So, and I've seen this. Maybe it's because I believe in it, so I look for it and I want to see it. But yeah, I would like to see the article because I'd like to see
I'll see if I can
I'm convinced or not.
I'll see if I can send you something. I know there's sometimes things where like I see it with my own eyes. I can't believe it. But I mean, I have my two daughters. But if I gave them that strategy and the choice to either write a keyword or a sketch, my younger daughter would choose a sketch. My older daughter would choose a keyword, hands down, without a question. But I think is that her learning style? Is there any proof that she learns better when using one modality over another? Perhaps that's what the learning styles research has failed to prove. So I'll see if I can find something for you.
Why do you think that research is so important to your practice?
I think it's important to follow science, but I also think it's important to acknowledge limitations of science. And at the same time, I think the work that teachers do in classrooms every day is a form of research. It's a form of action research. We try something, we notice the impact it has on students, we revise, we try something different, we notice impact that has, and on and on and on. So that's valuable too. So it's a both and, not an either or. And I think the more interdisciplinary response that we have, the more we're pulling from a variety of fields with different areas of expertise and different perspectives on learning and engagement and comprehension and strategies, like all of that, the more nimble we can be as educators, the more we have this toolbox that we can respond to different situations and different kinds of kids in our classrooms.
Well, I think that's the essential part of it. We need more training and have a toolbox that's a lot fuller of strategies, and possibly if I had learned these strategies that you have in your books maybe I would have been more effective teacher when it comes to reading. I mean, again, I'm an amazing math teacher because math is not intuitive to me. And so I had to break it down. With reading, I loved reading. And so I did not know how to break it down. And what you have is, you've published a lot of books on the strategies. So I encourage people to go to your books. I really want them to learn some more strategies. What I'd also like to talk about is your podcast, because you have an incredible podcast. You not only interview incredibly interesting people, but then you have two colleagues who talk about how you can implement their information into the classroom, which is perfect. That's what teachers need.
So that's the format. The people that join me for the second half are different every time, although there's some that sign up often. Those are all members of my consulting team. So they're my colleagues who know my work really well, and we've kind of come from the same philosophical background. And I am loving doing this podcast. It was just like a fun project in between. I was writing one book. I finished it before starting another one. I was like, I'm going to put a podcast together. So I just reached out to researchers, many of whom are people that I cited in my book, whose research I had learned from. And I thought, what they have to share is so valuable. And yet their research studies are often paywalled, right? You can't even get to them. So this was a great way for me to help, just help teachers know about them by having conversations with them about their research. And then,
finally get their research free, right, Jennifer?
Yeah, exactly. I'm just kind of circumventing that paywall. And then, the classroom, that's what I called the podcast, because what good is this research if it doesn't make its way into practice? So sometimes, or should I say often, researchers are not teachers. They don't have a background in teaching. And it takes teachers who can understand the research to say, so what do I do here? What do I actually implement? How does this look? What time of day is this fitting in? How do I weave this into the practices I already have going on in the classroom? Because as a teacher, people are always like, try this, try this, try this, try this. Here's a new thing. And you got to make space for it, or you got to think about how it fits in, or what practice are you going to swap out because it's less effective. So yeah, I'm loving having these researcher conversations. And I always love talking with my team because they're just a really smart bunch.
No, I love it, because you really are giving these researchers a platform, because as you say, I mean, they're more interested in publishing, and they don't usually have to talk about it unless it's in a very small group, people who are
researcher conferences.
Yeah, which are not really extensively attended. I mean, there aren't huge groups. So I love the fact that you're giving them a much more extensive platform. I want to respect your time. This has been incredible that you've given us this time to explain your strategies. What would you like to do as you go on? What is your wish for the new generation coming up? What would you like them to be able to do with the work you're doing?
Oh, that's a lovely question. I really strive to just put stuff out in the world that's helpful, immediately helpful to teachers. So I'm always just trying to listen to teachers, hear about problems of practice, create books that are really useful and helpful in their classrooms. And I'd like to continue supporting teachers through professional learning, because I sometimes say it is what kept me in education was professional learning. I just really believe in professional learning to feed and support teachers. So I want to keep doing that. In the US, there's just a real attack on teachers. There's a real blaming of teachers. Everything from, they didn't open the schools soon enough. It's the teacher's fault. Oh, their kids have a gap from the pandemic. It's the teacher's fault. Whatever, it's just constantly, it's the teacher's fault, right? And I think what we're seeing is this, I'm not going to say I think, I know that what we're seeing is fewer teachers are signing up to go into education, and people are retiring or leaving the classroom early. And there is a real teacher crisis. And at the same time, there are some publishers creating materials that don't require teachers, that are, kids are on computers with headphones, and the computer's teaching them to read, not the teacher. And so the dystopian way of looking at this is that, we're preparing for a world without teachers, but teachers are just so absolutely critical that my hope for the world is that we find ways to be more honest at how absolutely critical this profession is, how valuable and important teachers are to society, that we pay teachers better, that we support teachers better with professional learning, and that we have a change in this profession in terms of perception. I went to, when I was a really young teacher, I got a Fulbright scholarship and I went to Japan. And it was all teachers from all across the United States. And we were all met in Tokyo. We spent some time there. It was a kind of a cultural trip for teachers to learn more about Japanese culture and take back what we'd learned to the United States. But also we visited schools there. And we saw like the Ministry of Education, and we visited primary schools and secondary schools. And the culture in Japan is what I wish we could have here in terms of education. So for example, you tell someone you're a teacher on the street and they bow to you, right? There's just this reverence because they understand and respect what teachers do. How do we do that here? How do we bring that here? Or teachers don't have, their workday is not full of teaching. They have time when they're given to collaborate with their colleagues. The physical school building in a Japanese school, there is a huge room with desks for teachers to gather and to come collaborate and work together on these. I know you're shaking your head like this is so foreign, but that idea that you are treated as professionals, it's mentorship. The first year teaching, you don't have your own class. You're mentored and a sort of apprenticed into this profession. What do we do here in the United States? We just, you have
throw the teacher
student teaching experience, or in some cases, you're an emergency certified, like Teach for America. You're doing like a month of training over the summer, and then you're in one of the highest need schools in the country. Good luck.
Yeah.
Right. That is not a recipe for success. So I wish that we could have, I don't know if it's a legislative courage. I don't know what it's going to take, that people start putting more money toward teacher salaries, that the way that the school day goes, the way that the school buildings are built, like all of it, there just needs to be this cultural shift in appreciating the very, very important work that teachers do. I worry we're moving in the wrong direction, but my hope is that we're able to right the ship.
No, I love that. I love everything you just said about it. Part of the problem is that the teachers who are staying in the profession are the ones that really love what they're doing. And so instead of putting time into fighting politics and fighting policies, they're putting their energy into the classroom. And that's what most people don't really understand. And it is a shame. So I really appreciate everything you just said, and especially the cultural differences. You seem to have really taken that to heart, and it's something that comes out in your interactions with the schools you're working with. So Jennifer, I cannot thank you enough. I'm going to have to go back and listen to this really carefully because you have given us so many gems, and I'm going to put all the links in so people can find you. We have the publications, the podcast, your webpage, because they need to learn these strategies.
Thank you, Donna. I really appreciate the conversation. Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, it's a pleasure. So that was our incredibly informative talk with Jennifer Serravallo. Did you guess the country she's so impressed with? How did you feel about her diatribe on AI taking over humanity and education? And reading strategies, how many of them did you write down to use tomorrow in your lessons? No worries if you didn't. I'll have them all in the show notes, where to find the incredible Jennifer Serravallo, and links to her website and books. For more incredible conversations on education like this one, please go to Doorways to Learning with Donna, and more scaffolds to begin a book at scaffoldingmagic.com. In the meantime, have fun in your classes and at home, and see you soon for more.